Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. My guest tonight is Murtaza Haider. He is a professor at Toronto Metropolitan University, formerly Ryerson, and I've had the privilege of chatting with him before on a couple different topics. But tonight we're going to talk about really the future of cities. We've got an election tonight, a very important election in the history of Toronto, and Professor Haider has been very prolific in his writing on issues such as immigration, on transit, on housing, and on the future of cities. And so I thought it would be kind of appropriate to check in with a pretty smart guy on what's going on. Professor Haider, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you. So let's talk about the future of cities. You wrote recently on the future of cities, and you were on, I guess, CBC Radio talking about the future of cities just a week or two ago. Tell me, is it future cities bright? Or given pandemic and commercial real estate that people are still working from home, it's negative?
No, the future of cities is bright, for sure. There's absolutely no two opinions about it. Cities have been with us for thousands of years, and cities will be with us until the for foreseeable future. The question to ask is will our relationship with the cities change? Will our definition of cities will change? Will our expectations of what we derive from cities will that change? And I think that would change, evolve. What has happened is that people have found ways to do things differently. This very notion that I'm going to work and I have to be there every day from 9 to 5, that notion got severely disturbed and due to the pandemic. And that's working from home has allowed people and the firms and the businesses to rethink their business models. It wouldn't matter much what the workers think, but what really matters is what the businesses think, what the employers think. If they think that they can have the same or similar or higher levels of productivity from their workers, irrespective of them working from the office or from home or from another third place, then they would go for it as long as it reduces their cost of operations or cost of doing business. I believe it has turned out that those costs are lower. That is, that the firms do not have to have as much space dedicated for offices as they did before. Therefore, you see this phenomena of working from home or teleworking continuing. I give you one more thing. I think people might think that everything started to change in March of 2020 when we declared a pandemic, and this working from home became a big phenomenon. As long as that working from home is concerned, this is true. But what was happening much before that is the space we allocated per worker. It used to be 150, in some places 200 square feet, 150 to 200 square feet per worker of office space that the firms were providing for. And that was a lot of office space given that millions of workers. But even before the pandemic, that number had started to shrink from 200 square feet per worker to 150 square feet per worker to 125 to 100 and in some cases 75 square feet per worker. So the businesses were economizing on the amount of space that they dedicated per worker. And just this telework or working from home is going to bring that number even smaller, which means people will be working from different places. Our downtowns will change. They may not remain the central business districts where business is the main thing. It will be a business, but of a different kind. May not be that of an office, but that of an entertainment. We will not give up going for concerts. We will not give up going for sports, watching sports in arenas and whatnot. We will not give up on our desire to have meals and other entertainment. I think the downtowns will transform into places of entertainment more so because that's what will bring people more regularly to downtowns as opposed to coming into an office. Think about it. If you have an office worker, you leave home, stuck in traffic or in transit for an hour, go to work, fire up your laptop and start answering emails. You could have answered those emails from your home or somewhere else an hour ago. And that is the realization that many individuals, workers, and firms are working on.
I agree with you that some people realize that, but I challenge you in regards to that this is an issue for employers and not employees, because frankly, I've been, in my experience, seeing a lot of employers that want people to come back, and it's the employees that are resisting it, particularly young employees that are self-selecting away from companies that are demanding full-time office employment and are going to those firms that are either hybrid or remote. And more and more companies, in my experience, I don't know why, but I think it's because of a concern of lack of productivity, a concern of lack of collaboration, a concern of lack of mentorship and relationship building, are requesting people to come back. I think that there's some concern about productivity and that people are spending too much time on personal activities, really wondering whether people are working on those Mondays and Fridays when they're at home. But I'm seeing employers demanding people come back to work and employees objecting to that.
Yes, this is true. In many arenas and many fields of business, but I have a sort of a cynical take on it, and I'll tell you why. Look, if I'm the CEO and president of a bank, Canadian bank, and I just spent over $1 billion building a new building in downtown Toronto, let's say, will I go around and tell my employees that, hey, work from home, it's okay? That $1 billion we spent on those towers, it's okay, they can stay vacant. Obviously not, right? Like, you're going to be the chief promoter of face-to-face interactions because you've told your board and you've told your employees in the last 10 years, we need a head office. We need a big head office. We need $1 billion to be spent on a head office. Then you do it. And then the pandemic hit and then everybody works from home. What are you going to do? You're going to turn around and start singing praise of face-to-face interactions and innovations and collaborations that happen, and so again, there's some of that also happening. The other thing is that you also have a big industry called the commercial real estate, and that commercial real estate has a big component called the office real estate. That office real estate is really struggling at the moment. In Calgary, 35% of the offices do not have a lease. Vacancy rate is 35%. In Toronto, it's between 15 and 20%. If it's 20% or higher, it means that if you look at 5 towers in front of you, one of them is empty or vacant, that it has no leases. That's what 20% vacancy means. But on top of it, it may have a lease, but it's not occupied because people are working from home. So the occupancy level, which are different from vacancy level, vacancy just tells you that you have a lease. Now, if the space is leased, but still occupancy level is 50% or lower, it means that people are not coming to work. Now, 2 types of people or firms or agents, economic agents, would have a vested interest in bringing people back. Number one is the office real estate. They cannot afford to have vacancies that high and occupancy levels that low, and especially office real estate that is not of the top tier quality. The AAA buildings, they probably will do good, but then third tier real estate, people will slowly move out of them and would not renew their leases. So they would be pushing for it. The other thing is the lenders. The office real estate has hundreds of billions of dollars of debt that has been afforded to them through all sorts of different lenders. If office real estate goes down, combined in North America, trillions of dollars of debt is at stake. So therefore, you will have another set of individuals and interests who would be pushing for, let's get the workers back. At the end of the day, what we need from our workers is productivity. We should measure it and make it open. Make it public that, yes, we did a study and we found out that people are really not working from Mondays and Wednesdays. Here's the percentage of deadlines that we meet on Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays when workers are at home. And here's the percentage of deadlines we fail to meet on Mondays and Wednesdays when they're working from home. On Mondays and Fridays, they're not as productive, not meeting as deadlines, but Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursdays, when they're at offices, they're meeting the deadlines. Let us see that data. I don't think that data is there because I don't think that this is a capacity and capability for many firms, even advanced firms, to have their productivity measured at such a fine scale. What really is happening is a third category of people, and that's the middle managers. Middle managers really, look, think about it. 2 industries have suffered. The middle managers, they have no one to boss around anymore because people are working from home. And the industry, the office romance industry, right? Like what's now that has gone down. Like, who's going to have a romance with if you're stuck at home? So imagine all of these cohorts put together. If they have an interest, they would like to be back in the office. But the reality is, I think, going forward, it would be impossible to unlearn what we have learned through the pandemic. And the lesson we have learned is that we have much more flexibility for knowledge economy workers to be productive in different ways. And the firms who want their employees back, this is still an experiment. Let them have their employees back. Eventually, they will realize that there is a need for a hybrid mix. Now, we are working from the assumption that everyone wants to go back, not go back. But the reality is there's a big cohort of employees who would like to go back because they've been stuck in their 250 to 500 square feet apartments, and they don't want to be stuck there all the time. And they like the freedom of going to work, and they like the freedom to be able to be in downtown and see other people. So there's also this cohort that would like to go back. So what the future will be is a hybrid future where the employees or the employers who would like to be back in office, they should be given an opportunity to do so while we continuously monitor the productivity at the firm, at the worker, and at the economy level. Because without numbers and metrics, what we will have is conjecture and guesstimates.
Fascinating conversation. We're chatting with Professor Murtaza Haider from Toronto Metropolitan University about the future of cities, which I think is an appropriate conversation given this by-election that's going on this evening. Stay with us, everyone. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're talking tonight about the future of cities, which I think is appropriate given the by-election that's going on this evening. My guest is Professor Murtaza Haider, who is at Toronto Metropolitan University, and he's written quite a bit and commented quite a bit on a lot of different impacts to cities, immigration and transit, office workers, employment, et cetera, in the last little while. And so I thought it would be very helpful to chat with him about this. Professor Haider, just before the break, we were talking about the impact of remote work on downtowns. I was at the Urban Land Institute convention just a couple of weeks ago in Toronto, and the final keynote speaker was interesting because he said, if you are only having your employees come in once a day, you're missing out on collaboration, innovation, mentorship, et cetera. But if you're demanding your employees come in 5 days, you're going to be losing out on some of the best employees that you can have because they're going to self-select away. And so therefore, the key for you as a company, if you want people to come back, is to figure out why you're going to be attractive to have them come back. What's about the office? What is it about mentorship and collaboration that's key? And then he went further and said, this applies to cities as well. If you want to have vibrant downtowns and people aren't coming back and transit is down on Mondays and Fridays, you got to think about what you're going to do to make your downtown more vibrant. So given that we've got an election going on, what should we do to make offices more attractive and downtowns more vibrant?
I think these are valid points. I fully agree with the speaker at the Urban Land Institute, is that they have to provide a value add. So why would you like people to be back? Take Yonge and Bloor subway station before the pandemic. People were packed like sardines on the platform, on the staircases, and multiple trains would pass before you get an opportunity to board a train, right? That was the scenario before the pandemic. Now, many people say we have to go back to the normal. That wasn't normal. Like, I'm stuck on a subway platform trying to get on a train and not being able to board it for 2, 3, 4 trains. Who thinks in their right mind that that's a normal? Then look at the traffic, look at the transportation. The city downtown core is either dug up. Queen Street is dug up, so neither the streetcars are going east of Bay and Queen, nor any other traffic. We have got construction happening elsewhere. And we have other crews, which I think are movie crews, have taken up lanes in downtown Toronto. So the traffic is not moving. Plus, we had the King Street restricted to cars, and we want them to only go one block and then turn, and then we force them to turn, make a right turn. Are we making downtowns attractive for people to arrive there by public transit, by not having enough public transit? Or are we making downtowns attractive by putting up all sorts of barriers to motor vehicles? I think, and that's where I get concerned, even when I look at the manifestos of various electoral candidates for the mayoral election, that they are actually making downtowns even less accessible by private automobile and other modes at times, which I think would be very, very hurtful for the economic interests of downtown. You make it difficult to get to downtowns, people will stop getting to downtown. So now the question is, what can you do? What can you do? How do you make it? Well, for example, for public transit, we need to work very hard to restore our riderships. May not be at the levels where people start feeling like sardines packed in a confined space, but at least higher than where we are today. Why I say this is because during the morning peak hours before the pandemic, let's say from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., people arriving for work in the downtown core, south of Bloor, the urban core, 60 to 70% of those people would arrive by public transit. So without public transit, that accessibility link is gone. So we need to see riderships increase in public transit, which I believe are around 60% of the pre-pandemic level. They have to go higher. And the way to go higher is to ensure that the system works, it's reliable, it's efficient, it's not too congested, and more importantly, it is safe. The safety concerns as of late, especially during the pandemic, with some very high-profile crimes that have taken place and assaults, we did a study and we found out that when the ridership declined at the onset of the pandemic in 2020, the crime rates, assaults especially, on the TTC property and other places didn't decline proportionately, which means that the rate of crimes normalized by the number of passengers, it skyrocketed, it just ballooned after the onset of the pandemic. And then through news media over the last 2 years, you've seen that there was some truth to it. It was just those numbers really were focused on people did focus on crime, and improving the perception of safety on public transit vehicles and property is critical now for bringing people back to public transit. And that's the point. First, that point I would like to make is to keep downtowns vibrant. We have to make sure that we invest properly in public transit. The second point I make is stop fighting the car. Stop fighting accessibility by private automobile to downtowns, because you need those people who would like to be in downtown. They don't like to be stuck in congestion. They just don't have transit as a viable alternative. Do not make downtowns a unimodal way access, thinking that we can get rid of cars and everybody will be walking, biking, and taking transit to downtown. That's not going to happen given our spatial distribution of where people live and where people work. So think creatively. Now you have Queen Street blocked. Make King Street open. Open it. It was not one of the 10th commandments that thou should not drive on King Street in downtown Toronto. You have blockages all across downtown. Remove that restriction so that at least some flow could be restored so people can access. As a transportation engineer, I can tell you that it's not just congestion. It's not just reducing congestion that is the ultimate goal of a transportation system, but increasing the overall throughput capacity of the system, that more people can walk, bike, transit, and drive through our network. That's one of the goals as well. So to make sure that we can maintain the throughput capacity in our downtown core, let's reimagine. Let's not be very in our ways of doing things. If we have lost capacity on Queen Street, if we have lost capacity on other arterials in downtown because of construction, because of some other maintenance, because of a movie crew, let's remove other restrictions that we can on places like King Street corridor and other places so people can still get to downtown. What's the first thing people tell you about downtowns? Those who don't like to go to downtown, it's impossible to get there. But that would hurt you if your vacancy rates in office buildings are 20%, and if they're heading to 30%, you better make people get to downtowns a little easier than what it is now.
So transit is the big improvement that you think that we need to
absolutely
to ensure in downtown Toronto. Let me ask you one question on the King Street situation. In my personal experience, the problem wasn't the through traffic on King Street; it was the left-hand turns. People in cars would get in front of a streetcar trying to turn left and would have to take a long time and would block the streetcars. So the traffic that was actually going through wasn't the issue.
Yes,
but we got rid of all the traffic.
Oh yeah, I'll tell you. I studied that for 2 years, and your listeners will be surprised to hear what I have to tell you. Is that the many proponents of that King Street pilot project that became implemented, they declared that things have improved so much that it's a success. The reality is the last time the city, or the last data that I have, when the city calculated the number of people crossing King Street, that number did not improve before the pandemic. That is, number of people crossing the King Street in a given time period by all modes of transportation did not change before or after. That number remained almost the same, and that the gains in travel times were in one direction and not in the other direction. So it wasn't a universal improvement that people were moving faster. And the fact that more people were taking public transit, not because King Street pilot project enabled it, is because they added 40% more streetcars on the route. And they say, look, more people are taking it. Well, yes, because you didn't have those streetcars from before. During the pilot project, you added more streetcars and told people that, look, because of this restriction on cars not being able to go through intersections, we have 30% or 40% more people riding the trains or the streetcars. Well, obviously, you added 40% more streetcars. You made it more frequent. You added more trains to the system, and therefore you see an increase. In their defense, they said that if we had tried to do it, otherwise they would have jammed up, but not necessarily. But you're right. There are 3 or 4 interventions that they made. And I made this presentation to the city multiple times, and I explained that when you're making interventions, don't enforce them together. For instance, no parking in the curb lane during the day or during busy hours. That was one intervention. No right turns, that's another. No left turns, that's another intervention. No going through the intersection on most intersections for automobiles, that was a third intervention. Then they said, look, it's working. But the reality is they can't tell us. And this is after many, many debates with the city and other stakeholders. I said, tell me with confidence that if you had just banned the left turn and have banned no curb street parking, you would have achieved the same results. And they say, yes, we can't tell you because we implemented all of it together. And I said, tell me, if you had introduced these additional trains or streetcars, more streetcars before the pilot project, that you would have seen much improvement in the ridership because you're running more frequent. So yeah, we can't tell you that also because we did bunch together all these interventions. And that's a classic problem with intervention analysis, that when you make 5 or 6 interventions together and you get a desirable result, you pick the intervention you like the most, saying, oh, this blocking of cars delivered everything. But the reality is, where you and I probably agree, it's the no left turn that was critical. Because see, when I was a graduate student, I'll tell you the story. I was a student in transportation engineering, doing masters at that time. And one of Canada's most amazing professors or experts in traffic and transit, Richard Soberman, was my professor. And he used to say this, that, look, it makes no sense that a streetcar with 100 people on board is blocked by a Kia with one person trying to make a left turn. It makes absolutely no sense. This was his classic argument in the public transit course, graduate course. And many people who are now experts in public transit would have taken that course with Richard Soberman. And so this was known to us. Richard Soberman's story about a Kia blocking a streetcar goes back to 1980s, which he repeated all period, trying to convince planners to restrict those left turns on busy arterials. But we didn't do that. We banned the left turn. We banned the curb street parking. We banned the through traffic. And then we also didn't have the means to enforce it. That's another thing. People were during the pilot project, all those proponents of King Street restricted to automobiles were busy taking pictures of cars going through, or they somehow decided that there should be furniture on roads. I mean, that's another misconception, that you build a road and then urbanists come out, some urbanists, not all, they say, well, we'd like to see some street furniture on it. I would rather sit right next to moving vehicles and sip coffee. I mean, that's absurd to me. I mean, why would I be next to exhaust coming out of cars, having coffee? I could be more merciful to my lungs. I don't have to do this. You don't have to do this. Don't take your kids out. Sit them next to cars and trucks and vehicles going by because you want to have a patio experience. That's not the right experience. Find some places where vehicles are not there. But anyhow, that's a different story. At the end of the day, no one can tell us two things: that A, just by restricting left turn and curb street parking, we would have achieved similar or same results. And no one can tell us that by adding more streetcars before the pilot project, we would have seen a remarkable increase in the number of transit riders on King Street. And no one can explain why the travel time savings are in one direction and not in the other.
2 or 3 of the candidates have come out against keeping the Gardiner Expressway elevated and want to bring it down to the east of Cherry Street. If you're a transportation engineer, sir, what do you think about those proposals? They're saying it's going to be $500 million in old dollars, and so actually in actual dollars, it might be over $800 million to $1 billion just to maintain it as an elevated. And the other comment I heard is that all it does is reduce travel times by 2 minutes for 2% of the commuters that actually use that portion.
Yeah, I know. Josh Matlow wrote a letter in 2015 to his constituents, and I wrote to him, and I actually had a I wrote on Huffington Post. I actually said this 2-minute savings is not just for like 2% or whatnot. It affects 440,000 commuters. 440,000 people who drive through the system. And it's not my numbers. Actually, this was all done by the city in an environmental assessment report made public. And then people just selectively read through it. The problem is most people who throw numbers on billions of dollars, they haven't done enough training in what we call, the infrastructure finance training, right? I used to teach this course at McGill University, Urban Infrastructure Investments. And it had all sorts of finance and lending and construction cost estimates and whatnot. Most people who throw these numbers actually have absolutely no idea how finance works or how engineering works when it comes to rehabilitation. But I'm not going to go there because that's too technical. It's going to bore the heck out of your listeners. But I can tell you one thing that people can understand. If you have X number of vehicles crossing Gardner East, how do we separate traffic and how do we make it safer? We do it by grade separation. That is, we build an underpass or an overpass, right? So that's how we prevent vehicles from colliding with each other, or we separate them in time, separate them in grade, or separate them in time. How do we separate them in time? We put traffic signals, right? There's no third way of teleporting people. So now you have got Gardner East, and those vehicles are separated at grade from pedestrians. Right? There are no pedestrians on Gardner East. You're not in their right of way. You're safe. Now you take the same number of vehicles going on grade separation, bring them down to the pedestrian level, and then pass them and tell us that it's going to be safer. Absolutely not. You're going to put more pedestrians in more vehicles passing through that corridor. It's not safe. Then you look at the environmental assessment report, and it said that this total delay on a daily basis was 1.8 million person hours or vehicle hours. That was humongous. That has a cost to it. If you attach a dollar value to it, that cost is significant. Don't just look at rehabilitation costs and say, well, I will save money here and there. And frankly, I've never seen money being saved. It's always end up at the end of it. Look at your Eglinton West corridor. It was started at $2 billion, then it went to $7 billion, then it went to $9 billion. Where is it now? $13 billion and rising. So anyone tells you that I'm going to put $500 million in your pocket, say, give us a bond that if this is not true, I can make a claim. The problem is that they will say anything, but you just use your logic. Taking a flood of vehicles, putting it at the pedestrian level is putting more pedestrians in harm's way, number one. Number two, there's millions of hours of congestion that will result from it, that will result in more tailpipe emissions, that will result in more greenhouse gas emissions. It will affect your breathing and your quality of life. That's also a fact. And most importantly, ask these guys who are telling you these numbers and say, hey, what about the report that the city did? Did you read it or did you misinterpret it? I think Josh Matlow misinterpreted it. He thought that, okay, this is only 5,400 people in a 1 hour time limit that are going through this highway, so they are the ones affected by it. The reality was 440,000 people were affected by it. And the reason why that number was small, that per person number, that it was like 90 seconds, because they took all the delay and divided it by 440,000 commuters or drivers, and then came up with that 90-second delay. If they had divided it, that total delay by say 5,400 drivers, that delay would be in hours. And I've written about it. I encourage people. I'll send you the link. I did read through the entire report. It takes time. As a professor, I'm used to reading 500 pages of reports, and that's fine. But I took all the relevant information, put it in a Huffington Post article, and I'll send you the link.
So keep the Don Valley Parkway and the Gardner Expressway the way they are.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Don't mess with it, because see, again, the people who are talking about it do not have the technical financial expertise to be able to promise what they are promising. They mean well, I know that these people are very dedicated. I'm very impressed with the dedication of these individuals, like Josh Matlow. I admire him very much. Olivia Chow, I admire them very much as they have a lifetime of public service. I'm just saying that I wouldn't take advice from them if I have a heart trouble. I wouldn't ask them and say, hey, should I get one stent or two? That's not the information I'm going to seek from them, even though I respect them. Nor will I take advice on transportation engineering from them.
We're going to take a break for some messages and come back. And I'm going to ask the professor about affordability, affordable housing, because that's got to be one of the biggest issues in the Greater Toronto Area, in the province, and in this municipal election. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight about Toronto, about cities, about urban planning, about transit, with Professor Murtaza Haider, who is a professor at Toronto Metropolitan University. And we've had a really interesting conversation about transit. Professor, I want to turn to, I think, one of the big issues in this election and in Ontario, Greater Toronto Area in general, and that is affordable housing. And it appears to me that really there's two different ideas in this current election, which are probably the same as in the whole Greater Toronto Area and in the province of Ontario right now. There are some people that want to address this lack of affordable housing with more social housing, and have been really focused on the provision of social housing, saying that cities and provinces need to, give land and build housing and provide that for the poor, for the very disadvantaged. And another group that say supplies the issue generally in the economy, and what we need to do is get rid of red tape and regulation and provide more housing for everyone. And then the general level of housing affordability will reduce, and there'll be more affordable homes. What do you think is the solution for our lack of housing affordability? Some people are saying we could risk being the Manhattanization of Toronto, where only the rich can afford to live, and the middle class, or at least the lower middle class, and the poor can't afford to live, and all the clerical workers and the restaurant workers are going to be commuting in from Barrie.
Yes, I am fully in agreement with both schools of thought. I fully agree that supply is the issue, and we haven't built as many homes as we should have in the past. But I also fully agree that non-market housing, you want to call it social housing, let's call it social housing, but non-market housing that is subsidized and it's not for profit, we also need to build that out on priority. So when I say supply is the issue, I'm saying supply is the issue for people who can afford or could be able to afford housing, but supply is also the issue for lack of affordable housing, and therefore we need to ramp up our construction on housing. And I'm very I'm delighted to see that the city, both as the councillors and staff, have agreed with the province of the target of 285,000 new dwellings over the next 8 years or so. And their agreement shows me and gives me confidence that there's a willingness to do things right. Now, let me explain a few very critical things where I think some of your candidates running for mayor will demonstrate that their positions, maybe their heart is in the right place, their mind may not be in the right place. So let me explain that. First of all, housing is a human right. You cannot deny shelter space if people can't afford it. There's no two opinions about it. But is this the responsibility of private landlords, or is it the responsibility of the state? What is wrong is making a state's responsibility, hand it over to private landlords and say, we are the government, the federal, the provincial, and municipal governments, but we think it's not our responsibility. You happen to own a property. Let's make it your concern to provide shelter to those who cannot afford it. That's where rent control comes in. That's where all sorts of these interventions come in, that we limit the ability of individuals to have private property, and we transfer the government's or the state's responsibility onto the poor, onto the landlords. Now, the question is, food is a basic responsibility, right? But if you have a grocery store and you're selling bread, would you imagine that the Premier of Ontario goes and says, we have passed a new law and the price of bread is fixed at $1 a loaf? That's it. Food is a basic right, and no one should be selling a loaf of bread for more than $1. And it doesn't matter if you have Loblaws or it doesn't matter if you're a mom and pop corner store. Even though we recognize food is a basic right, but we don't interfere with pricing of loaf of bread or a carton of milk. But somehow private landlords have to be told what they can or cannot do with renting their units, even if the cost of ownership This is a study by CIBC at Urban Nation that came out just a month ago that said that people who bought condominiums and rented them out in 2022 are underwater, that the rents they are receiving are less than the cost of ownership somehow. And it's not part of the subsidized housing. This is actually market rents are not high enough. So the reality is that we should not make investment in real estate, investment in residential real estate so difficult or impossible that we constrain the supply. Now, going back to the state's responsibility, subsidized housing or non-market housing provision is a responsibility of the federal, provincial, and local governments, not that of the private landlords. So how do you do it? You have so much land, publicly available land. You provide tax incentives, you provide other incentives. For instance, if you're building subsidized homes, and if you're building a small size unit versus a large size unit, you end up paying the same development fees or very similar development fees. Change all that. Incentivize construction of non-market social housing and supply that as a priority. I always say supply is an issue. I'll tell you why. Because in the 1970s, Canadians were building 12,000 homes per million people. That was the rate of construction in the 1970s, early 70s. It went down to 5,000 homes per million people, even when our population had been increasing so rapidly. And in the last year, 2022, added 1 million people to the population of Canada. Today, we're sitting at 40 million, and our rate of housing construction has been lower or going lower and hasn't recovered. So yes, build more housing. But I personally think that where we should start with is affordable housing. Incentivize tax breaks, give land, build social housing, because no city will be able to function without having safe, affordable housing for restaurant workers, for school teachers, for firefighters, for police, for all those individuals whose incomes are less than the median household income in the city. Without them, there's no city. This vibrance of city, the color of the city, the life in the city is made possible by the service of these individuals who are critical as a CEO of a bank for the success of the city. So make their housing a priority. Yes, supply is an issue. I believe in it. And then let me turn to this other thing, which I've been writing, and that I call impossible urbanism. We have reached a state where we are now at impossible urbanism. Impossible urbanism states that you can build nowhere. Now, if you try to build on the green belt, then they gang up on and say, well, oh, wait a second, Premier Ford, we can't build here. This is green belt. And I agree, we shouldn't be messing up with green, but not all of it, because not all of it is essentially green. But let's preserve the green belt. It's a valid argument that the pristine land, not build it. So yes, okay, no building on Greenbelt. Okay, let's go to Dixie and Lakeshore. There were 8,000 units to be built there. Let's intensify there, because these environmentalists are saying, let's densify where we have already built. Okay, let's try to densify there. No, we can't do that. Well, it's out of character. We had planned 8,000 units. We don't see 16,000 here. You can't build here. You can't intensify here. So where are we? We cannot build in the green areas. It's impossible to build on green fields. It's impossible to densify in the brown fields. So we have reached an era of impossible urbanism, and we have to defeat this, because our population is going to increase. But if we make it impossible for us to build more housing, we will only worsen the future housing outcomes for us. Prices will continue to rise, rents will continue to rise, and you will have fewer homes to buy or rent in the future.
So it seems to me that the province thinks that the biggest issue has been too much regulation at municipal governments, where it takes longer to get housing developments approved than it does to actually build them. And it's maybe NIMBYism that is present in a local community that influences the local council, or influences the planning commissioners and the planning organizations. And we restrict development, we restrict density, and we restrict height. And so a lot of the things that the province is currently doing are to try to accelerate that process and to remove restrictions. So I guess my question is, if that's true, and I'd like to know whether you think that's true or not, but if that's true, why should we be electing as mayors and as councillors people that have been part of that whole process, listening to the NIMBYism and enforcing this red tape and regulations over the course of the last decade that, as you have said, has taken our per capita housing development from 12,000 units per million people down to 5,000? It's like, if they were part of the problem, how can we trust that they're going to be able to solve it?
Well, if you're listening to this before you go to vote in Toronto, do not elect a NIMBY mayor. because this will make your life difficult. If you think it's not difficult now, or it's already difficult, to prepare for worse. And I'm not going to say who's going to be a NIMBY mayor, or otherwise. This is your decision, but just make sure that someone you elect is willing to open up the city for mobility, open up the city for accessibility, open up the city for housing, open up the city for innovation, open up the city for dynamism, because that's what is lacking in the city. But here's what has happened. The number that keeps mentioned is that it would take 32 months on average to get a residential building approved in Toronto. 32 months. That's almost 3 years. And that's back and forth. I think no one is contesting that number. I think there's no pushback from the city or the planners that this number is wrong. The question is why? And I'm very interested in it. I have actually approached the federal government with the idea that it's not 32 months that we should be focused on, but let's take a systematic review of what happens. Now, in our minds, we automatically assume that it must be the city, must be the planners, but it could be that the forms were filled wrong. It could be that the proponents of the project made some errors. So maybe we need to really look through it. And what I have proposed to the federal government through our granting agencies called SHRC, Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, I said, look, 32 months, we know that's how long it takes, but let's take a systematic review of those applications that were delayed over time and see how the file moved, where it took longer. Was it that the city didn't have enough employees? Was it that the developer actually filled the form wrong? Was it that the developer was proposing something that was structurally not sound or had some other impacts on the environment or whatnot? We have to think about it. Now, the other thing is,
what's your hypothesis? What is the cause?
I don't know. That if I had known the cause, I would have actually mentioned it, but I don't know. I don't want to assume one way or the other. I don't want to take sides with the city or with the developers. I say, give us an honest opportunity to actually go through those 50 applications that took the longest to approve. We go step by step. There's a thing called the process mapping. It's done in health sciences a lot, where they look at long queues at the emergencies. They look at people waiting longer for surgeries, and they do a process mapping to identify what is the root causes of delays. And we have proposed the same methodology to the federal government, saying, allow us to study this so that we can actually advise how to fix it. But there's one thing, I think that's where I compare two disciplines. One is urban planning and one is economics. And I think one is a dynamic principle and the other one is a static principle. And let me explain. I'm not trying to be funny or pejorative. It's just a fact of life. But in economics, we are very used to hearing that the new data on labor markets have just been released and the economists have revised their projections. The standard thing. They will revise their projections on interest rate. They will revise their projections on unemployment rate. They will revise their projections on prices. They will revise their projections on everything. As new information comes in, you improve or you revise your projections based on new information that is coming daily to you, weekly, or at least monthly. That's the dynamic nature of economics discipline. Now contrast it with urban planning. You do a master plan, and let's say that master plan was done in 1990, and it was designated that this area, this neighborhood of Dixie and Queensway or Lakeshore, it will be built at a density of maybe no more than 3 or 4 floors per building. And that was done in 1990. Now, if you want to change that, because everything around in that neighborhood changed in the last 20, 30 years, you have to go and apply for reviews and renewals and subplan revisions, and people will come in and start debating and try to stop it. The NIMBYs have the status quo in their favor, that they would like to preserve the status quo. No revisions are made. I think if you take the master plan and take the economic forecasting mechanism of dynamism attached to it and say, it's not a dead document. It's not a static document. It's not that we say we have a yellow belt in Toronto. What's a yellow belt? That most of the residential land has been designated for single family detached or single family dwellings. And that was part of the master plan. Well, why is that? It's because the master plan is a static document. But if we say, as new information comes in, as a city that used to be a city of just 600,000 before amalgamation, the city of Toronto is a very small place. Now it's a city of 2.9 million because we amalgamated it with the suburbs, North York, East York, York, Scarborough, and Etobicoke. Now, the city is not the same city. So bring some dynamism to your projections, bring some dynamism to your plans. Let the land use or master plan not be a document that is static, that was done in 1 year, and then you create this cumbersome process of revising it and subdivision approvals and this approval and that approval. Because if economists can revise interest rates projections on a monthly basis, we should be able to look at the master plan at least at an annual basis and adjust it. So my 2 cents, the free advice that I'm giving, I should not be giving, I should charge you consulting fees for it, is to have the master plan a dynamic document rather than a static document that it is right now.
Bring some dynamism into city planning. Sounds like a great concept to me. We're going to take a final break and come back with some concluding comments in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. This is an interesting conversation, particularly today, because if nothing else, and whoever you vote for, just get out and vote. You've got a couple of hours left to go. Get out and vote. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting about Toronto and urban planning and urban dynamism with Professor Murtaza Haider from Toronto Metropolitan University. We focus primarily on the city of Toronto tonight, sir. I wonder if I could elevate you for a second, because I think this idea of dynamism and urban planning is interesting, and changing our attitudes. We've got a city that, greater metropolitan area that is going to be the third largest metropolitan area in all of North America within the next couple of years. It's growing to such a degree. And I wonder whether we're addressing that correctly. And it's interesting because we have two very different attitudes toward the greater Toronto area. One is, separation and taking regional municipalities and separating them out. And you're seeing this in Mississauga and Brampton and Peel. And then in York, you've actually got the opposite, where the mayor of Markham has said, no, what makes sense is to integrate and amalgamate. And you mentioned just a couple of minutes ago about the amalgamation of Toronto. In 1996, there was a GTA task force that recommended the amalgamation of Peel, Halton, Durham, and York all into cities, getting rid of the two layers, and create a new GTA sort of like Metro Council of the 5 mayors, the 4 regions that have now become cities, and the city of Toronto, so that there could be collaboration, communication, planning, etc. So you got these two different sort of possibilities. One where you'd have 24 independent cities around the city of Toronto, because that's how many cities are in these 4 regions. Or you've got 4 cities with the amalgamation of the regions into cities. Which do you think makes more sense?
I would go back to the way these jurisdictions are defined in the Canadian Constitution. And I would look at the ways their revenue generation capabilities are defined in the Canadian Constitution. Regional governments neither have the mandates nor the ability to generate revenue. They are just a layer of bureaucracy as it stands today. They have no authority. All they have is the ability to say no to development, but they have no ability to accelerate anything. Therefore, I am not a big fan of larger regional governments. It just creates a layer of bureaucracy. Same is the case with the Peel, Mississauga, and Caledon, the Brampton, Mississauga, and Caledon and Peel region, that the regional government was another layer that you have to satisfy. And it didn't offer anything in return. Like, okay, you can say no, but what can you accelerate? What have you done? I mean, there are things that make sense that could be regional. Even before the city of Toronto was amalgamated, Toronto Transit Commission was running in all those 6 municipalities that now are called Toronto. So public transit, sewage, waste collection, all of these have economies of scale built into them, and they will be regional by default. There's no worries about it. But the regional level, like the mayor of Markham asking for a regional government, is just going to create another layer of bureaucracy.
No, he's not. He's not asking for a regional government. What he's saying is get rid of the town of Markham and amalgamate it with the town of Richmond Hill and Newmarket and Aurora and Thornhill, and create a new city of York comparable to the new city of Toronto.
Yes. Okay. So let me address that. Sorry, I misspoke. Apologize. This is kind of a dangerous thing. And then you could see it already happening in Toronto. When Toronto was amalgamated, who are the loudest voices in the city now? These are the downtown councillors, the downtown-centric councillors. Everything you hear in the political debate, and that's why I think tonight your listeners would be up for could be up for a surprise when they see suburban voters surprising all the pollsters who are predicting one candidate to win and not the other. Because what is happening is the loudest voices you hear are the downtown-centric voices. And they are the downtown-centric things like, oh, close this road, put a toll on DVP, demolish Gardner East, let the cars not enter City of Toronto. All those things that concern the suburban residents. These individuals are running campaigns thinking everyone thinks like them because I live in downtown or central part of the city. The reality is that these larger places, like Toronto is what, 630 square kilometers, 250 square miles. It's not just downtown Toronto. So what happens is that if you put all these bigger places in one small area and then give representation, the loudest voices come from one corner. It could be suburban voices or it could be urban voices. Same is the case with York Region. It's a massive place. It is a diverse place. Population living around the Steeles Avenue in the York Region is quite different from those who are up in Richmond Hill or approaching Barrie District. So what I'm saying is that you don't have a uniform, homogeneous demographic base. You have a very heterogeneous base, and people have different priorities in terms of lifestyle, where they work, where they would like to work and live. If you make these humongous cities in terms of physical size, like the land area, and in terms of the demographic footprint, that is the demographic footprint is probably the attraction because they want more taxpayers under one roof. But that's not going to be practically possible to deliver services when people have such diverse expectations of what the city should be delivering to them. Go and do a survey.
You're more supportive of the idea of separating.
Yeah, let's do a survey in Scarborough right now. Survey in Scarborough, North Etobicoke, and North York, and asking people, should we demolish Gardner East? And you know the answer. Overwhelming majority would say, are you crazy? I rely on that, right? Or even if I don't rely on that on a daily basis, I would like to keep it. You do a survey in downtown Toronto, they say, yeah, get rid of it.
But that argues actually for amalgamation, because that says that those people should have a point of view and a vote. Because if you de-amalgamated, the city of Toronto, the old city of Toronto, would be the decision maker. I think that you're arguing in favor of a more a wider role in decision making rather than this more narrow role. Anyway, we're out of time. So we're going to have to pick this conversation up another time. But this has been a pleasure chatting with you tonight, sir. And more than anything else, I think what you're saying is you've got a role to play in decision making. Don't just let it leave it up to either a downtown core or Scarborough core or an Etobicoke core. We all have a role in the decision making. So you got a couple of hours left. Go out and vote. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Good night.